Welcome back. I'm talking with Neil Sanders about the music industry and drugs because it is alleged that LSD was introduced by the CIA into popular music culture
Yeah,
deliberately.
of course it was. Yeah.
Why was that done, Neil?
Well, originally it came from Aldous Huxley. Now, Aldous Huxley was the author of Brave New World, but what people may or may not realise is that he was connected to the Tavistock Institute and British intelligence. He made this famous quote: "Let us consider another type of drug capable of making feel happy in situations where they would normally feel miserable. By making a harmless chemical euphoric freely available, a dictator could reconcile an entire population to a state of affairs that any self-respecting human being ought not to be reconciled." That was made at the Tavistock Group at the California Medical School in 1961.
Right.
So,
So you think it's possibly a way of, again, of stopping people from becoming effectively politically active,
yeah, totally.
and a nuisance to existing power structure.
There's that aspect of it as well, and I want to be careful about this because this sounds like I'm saying gateway drugs. It's not gateway drugs at all. But if you're the sort of person that gets used to using LSD in a long way, you open yourself up for arrest later on because you were associating yourself with what is a counterculture or whatever. Basically, you're integrating entire swathes of society into something that then in 1971 we make illegal.
Right. You mentioned the Rolling Stones earlier, in that you thought in their earlier days they were more political, and there was drugs introduced, and they were herded down a particular avenue. Just tell us about that.
I mean, this is all connected with a group called the Brotherhood of Eternal Love. Now, essentially, a lot of people would talk about LSD and Haight-Ashbury. We'll talk about the LSD cooks. Certain people that basically were handing out LSD in a big way, and people will talk about Owsley Stanley, they'll talk about Alfred Hubbard, they'll talk about the Brotherhood of Eternal Love, Tim Leary and Michael Hollingshead. Now, Michael Hollingshead was an MI6 agent. He was sent by Aldous Huxley to provide Timothy Leary with a lot of acid. Hollingshead was the person that introduced the Beatles, Roman Polanski, Allen Ginsberg, all of these people who went on to become very, very sort of influential in this sort of flower power generation. He introduced them at the behest of British intelligence to taking large amounts of acid. Timothy Leary is possibly the most famous. He was studying at Harvard. He was turned into a non-dropout. He was one of the big promoters of LSD. Now, if you look at the actual work that he was doing, all his work was concerned with wiping away existing brain patterns using LSD and putting in helpful patterns. And if that sounds familiar, it's because it is. It's exactly what William Sargent and Ewan Cameron were doing. It's mind control. Timothy Leary's two main sort of people that were involved with him at Harvard were Cord Meyer, who was a CIA agent that was in charge of Operation Mockingbird. Operation Mockingbird is a sort of COINTELPRO thing where they introduce false news programs into the media to cause dissent and to make people, go off on the wrong direction. And Frank Barron, who was also a CIA agent. Leary was basically interviewed many, many times, and in the end he basically says, of course I work for the CIA. The CIA are great. I was an active, willing participant in CIA experiments.
Right.
Now, when he was kicked out of Harvard, he was basically, luckily for him, there's a bloke called William Billy Hitchcock Mellon, allowed him to conduct these experiments on his estate. And he comes from a very rich banking oil family, and it was through this, they've also got connections to military intelligence, through this lucky happenstance that Timothy Leary was able to continue his previously CIA-sponsored experiments. Luckily, an elite family managed to step in and help him, so that's nice of them.
Right.
One of the people that basically introduced him on a wholesale level to LSD was this gentleman called Alfred Hubbard.
Right.
Alfred Hubbard is a very strange guy. Now, in his background, there's a lot of things that suggest mind control. When he was 19, he received a visitation by two angels. These angels taught him how to make a free motion, a perpetual motion device by which he made himself very, very rich. He later worked for the OSS bootlegging during Prohibition times. He was then hired by the OSS, the precursor to the CIA, to smuggle guns from Canada to the UK. He's another one of these people that basically is known as a Johnny Appleseed of acid. He was one of the people that managed to spread it out. again, he worked for Teledyne, which is a NASA-based weapons facility, and the connections of this guy through the military-industrial complex is completely obvious. Okay. The other guy, and this is all coming back to the Rolling Stones. The other guy was a fellow called Owsley Bear Stanley. Mm-hmm. Now again, he comes from his real name was Augustus Owsley Stanley III, and his grandfather was the senator of Kentucky. He comes from a military background. He went to military school. He spent a year in a mental institute, he designed several of the types of acid. One's called Orange Sunshine. One's called Monterey Purple. Orange Sunshine is the one that I'm going to talk about in a second that connects to the Rolling Stones and shows that the CIA were involved in all of the musical influences. Monterey Purple is what the Jimi Hendrix song Purple Haze was named after. Okay, so Owsley Stanley designed this type of acid called Orange Sunshine, and it was specifically and exclusively distributed through Timothy Leary and a band of ragtag hippies called the Brotherhood of Eternal Love. It was a quasi-religious cult that operated off of the Hitchcock-Mellon estate. Right. The second in command is Timothy Leary and a bloke called Ronald Stark. Mm-hmm. Ronald Stark was later arrested in Italy, and all charges were dropped against him because it had transpired that he'd been a CIA agent since before the 60s. Right. So again, the point about this Orange Sunshine is it shows up in several places that basically inform the beginning, the middle and the end of the 60s. The first, or the one area, is that the Manson family exclusively used... Charles Manson. This was recorded in Tex Watson, who was his right-hand man, depending on what you believe. In his autobiography, they're saying that they exclusively used Orange Sunshine LSD. Now, the only way they could have got this LSD was through the Brotherhood of Eternal Love, which, let's remember, Timothy Leary, CIA-sponsored, Ronald Stark, CIA-sponsored. Right. Several of the people that were actually involved in this later got arrested in a US Army black operations to smuggle marijuana into America. So again, the connections are there. The second incident, so we've got Charles Manson using Orange Sunshine. The second incident where Orange Sunshine is prevalent is the Vietnam War. It was by far the most prevalent acid used in the Vietnam War. How this ragtag bunch of 12 or 13 people in a VW van managed to get it to Vietnam, we're not quite sure. It also appeared at Altamont. Altamont was the free concert given by the Rolling Stones, which essentially sounded the death knell for the 60s. At it, the Hells Angels, who at the time, Sonny Barger, who was the head of the Hells Angels, was being used by the CIA as an assassin. He'd actually been hired to kill Cesar Chavez and Eldridge Cleaver, who was a Black Panther. They were the security for this. The Orange Sunshine at this gig, which went completely sour, was so powerful that they ran out of Thorazine, which is a countermeasure to this, after half an hour, and basically hundreds of people were left in a pathological state after this concert. The final incident, which shows that the CIA has got its fingers all over the place, is when the Rolling Stones were actually arrested. You may remember this is the famous bust where they broke open the door and they found Marianne Faithfull there. She was wearing nothing except a rug and a Mars bar, apparently. But what happened was there's a fellow called Schneiderman, David Schneiderman or Derek Schneiderman. Right. He was a mysterious Yank, as described by Keith Richards, that had 8 passports and a suitcase full of Orange Sunshine.
Right. So now, you're the CIA agent then?
Clearly, he was able to basically... The suggestion is that he is the person that actually called the police. He provided them with the acid and then basically sidestepped and was able to strangely go through the police lines to get it. The point that is sort of made by this is that this entire genre of music, the Haight-Ashbury scene, it was utilised to make San Francisco and this entire area one large petri dish. They were experimenting with these mind-controlled drugs. So
the Rolling Stones, do you think any of the members of the Rolling Stones were aware of this whole scheme to try and get LSD into the young population?
I don't
think that,
I know that they were very paranoid.
Were they just dupes to it, or
well, I know
they
were definitely very paranoid that they were basically being followed. I mean, after this bust, it very much looked like Mick Jagger was going to prison for a long time. Right. And I think this is how they managed to sort of curtail them back into,
Right.
You stick by the line, and we guarantee by the time it comes around to 2011, you'll be playing tours all over the world, and you'll be multi-millionaires and whatnot.
All right. Now let's just talk about the Beatles, because when I interviewed Gemma King, she was suggesting that there's people doing research saying that the Beatles didn't write any of their own music.
Yeah, it was a
And, you know, I got some nasty emails from Beatles fans when I said, well, when that was aired on the show, there's this German guy who was a friend of the Queen, allegedly wrote the Beatles music. Is that where do you stand on that one?
I don't entirely buy that. I can believe that they were utilised. I mean, this comes from John Coleman. John Coleman, the Committee of 300. I mean, I haven't seen his research. He could be right. What he suggested was that Adorno of the Frankfurt School, who came up with the concept of the culture industry, you know, culture as a factory that mindlessly produces products for consumption, he, using his 12-note atonal scale or whatever, wrote these particularly catchy songs and gave them to the Beatles. I'm not sure. I don't think that would be entirely necessary. I'm sure they had help. I'm sure they did, because, you know, they're a massive industry.
Okay. Now, let's just come on, finally. To introduce this next thing we're going to talk about, I just want to mention North East Truth Group. There's a guy there, I'll not mention his name, but when I go along there, I occasionally have a chat with him, and he'll say to me, Richard, there's no conspiracy theory too wild for me. I look at all of them, So he's into the hollow earth theory.
Yeah.
You've heard of that one. Now, the other one which we were talking about in the pub the other day is, and it makes me laugh, not because I have no view on it, okay? I'm a very open-minded person, as I have to be.
Yeah.
And I recently learned about this particular theory about Paul McCartney.
Yes.
And I'm not saying that I have any, I don't know enough about it, right? But the theory is that, is it in 1966?
It was just prior to the theory is it's just prior to the recording of the Sgt. Pepper album. Paul McCartney died in a car crash.
Paul McCartney died in a car crash. Is that in 66?
I'm not sure.
I'm not saying this is true, folks. I'm saying that this is an alleged
this is the theory.
Right. And then he was replaced with a double.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that there's a series of clues left throughout well, there's all sorts. Like
the double was called Fall.
Fall, the fake Paul. Some people
Fall.
suggest that his name was Billy Shields, which is what they say in before Get By With Little Help From My Friends, the one and only Billy Shears.
Right. Now, and the reason that people give as to why he was bumped off and replaced is because he was not wanting to promote LSD and blah blah blah.
Well, he wasn't
towing the line. This is the theory, no?
The theory that I heard is that basically he just died in a car crash, and the Beatles were such an enormous entity that from any sort of perspective, that they just had to continue on with it. And again, I'm going to reiterate, I'm not saying that this is what happened, but you could see a plausibility as to why somebody might do that. That's all I'm going to say. What irritates me,
there's loads of stuff on the internet.
Backwards masking, and like there's clues in the album covers and stuff like that.
And there's also the clip of Heather Mills.
Yeah.
Who says that, and I know Heather Mills was absolutely crucified in the mainstream media. I don't know what people think of her, but the media did a hatchet job on her. That's for sure. But she says that she's got a box which has got evidence in it, and that she's had death threats to say that she must not reveal this information.
Yeah.
I mean, you came in here and said you fear for your life and for Beatrice's
The police came
life.
round, and this is why I'm speaking about this now, and I have a box of evidence that is going to a certain person should anything happen to me. So if you top me off, it's still going to go to that certain person, and the truth will come out. There is such a fear from a certain party of the truth coming out that lots of things have been put out and done. So the police came around and they said, you have serious death threats from an underground movement.
A lot of people think that the information that she has is proof that McCartney was switched in 1966.
I don't know, you know.
I'm going to start another conspiracy that the other three Beatles were replaced with Forge Harrison, Fon Lennon and Ringo Starr.
I mean, one thing that I do know is that basically the only thing that I know about is that John Lennon was no fool. He was asked by Playboy magazine if he'd ever still use acid, and he says, not in years. A little mushroom or peyote, perhaps. It's not beyond my scope. You know, maybe twice a year or something, but you don't hear about it anymore. People are still visiting the cosmos, and this is a telling thing. He says, we must always remember to thank the CIA and the army for LSD. That's what people forget. Everything is the opposite of what it is, isn't it? So get out the bottle, boy, and relax. They invented LSD to control people, and what they did was give us freedom. Sometimes it works in mysterious ways. It's wonders to perform. If you look in the government reports on acid, the ones who jumped out the window or killed themselves because of it, I think even with Art Linklater's daughter, it happened to her years later. So let's face it, she wasn't really on acid when she jumped out the window, and I've never met anybody who's had a flashback on acid. I've never had a flashback in my life, and I took millions of trips in the 60s. The point that he's making is that he is aware that the military-industrial complex originally introduced LSD as a way to stymie dissent and to basically get people into a big heady fog so that they can't actually achieve anything of any use.
All right, Neil, well, I'll just ask you, what do you think the future holds for this? Do you think that
I think the future
in
holds
10 years' time there's going to be loads of mind-controlled people who are all controlled by computer programs?
Oh, very possibly. I think one of the things, particularly with music, is what I think you should notice is the amount of people that are coming out of either the X Factor or the Brit Academy.
I mean, we haven't discussed any of that, have we?
No, well, you know, that's all that needs to be said. Look at the amount of artists and look at where they're coming from, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not talented or that even that their message is not sort of thing, but that it means that we've got a narrowing of output. All these people that are being told to you that this is they're real, you know, you can get in with them. They're not. They're manufactured entities, and they're coming from a smaller and smaller source.
Yeah. All right then, Neil. Well, thanks very much for your comments. It's fascinating as usual, and good luck with your book.
Thank you.
What I will do is, when you finish your book, we'll get that. I'll mention it on the show and
Smashing.
maybe get it sold on the site.
Yeah, that'd be great.
We'll do a review of it when it's. When do you envisage it'll be finished?
Middle of April.
Middle of April,
Middle of
2012.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know when it'll be coming out, but it'll definitely be finished by the middle of April.
Right. So perhaps second part of this year, people may be able to buy it. I think.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Right. All right, Neil. Thanks very much. It just remains for me to say, believe none of what you hear and only half of what you see. I'm Richard D. Hall. Good night.